Ladies and gentlemen, welcome on today's press conference, which creates the part of our today's conference devoted to Gender Equality Index presented by EIGE Institute, European Institute for Gender Equality, and the director Virginija Langbakk, who is sitting next to me. I also want to welcome here at the conference Madame Regner, who is the Minister for Children, the Elderly and Gender Equality from the Ministry of Health and Social Affairs from Sweden, and Mr. Dimitros Papadimoulis from European Parliament, who will surely introduce himself more. I can only say that with those two ladies sitting next to me, we have very good long-term cooperation in the area of gender equality. Today we see the new figures, the new gender index. Madam Virginia will speak about it later. I can only say that I am disappointed by the figures because they in fact tell us a sad story, a story of stagnation, slow progress and prevailing gender inequality across Europe. We cannot think of our societies as modern when we let so many people down, even every year and every day. I very often say that the European Union is a good address for women, but there is a big room for improvement. The numbers tell us not only the story about the EU as such, but also about the huge differences between the EU countries. On a scale of 0 to 100, Greece and Hungary attain only 50 points, whereas Denmark and Sweden get around 80 points. Madame Regner will tell us what is the magic, how they do it. Italy emerges as champion of progress, having moved up by 12 points, but still remains below EU's average. What worries me most is that in a number of EU countries the equality standards deteriorated. Nearly half of the EU countries have reduced scores in at least one domain, be it access to work or financial situation or knowledge. And there are no geographic patterns in this. Finland, Germany and Slovakia have lower scores in 2 and Greece even in 3 domains, in particular in the domains of power, time and money. I guess you have the fact sheets and the brochure which explains more what I mean by speaking about domains. There are several domains where we measure the index and the factors of equality and inequality. So we have also figures regarding not only work, financial situation and knowledge, but also the index of power, which shows the difference between the political or public sector and private sector. So I highly recommend you look at these figures because they show something and they tell something quite crucial about how the member states approach this gender issue and whether they are able to fully use the potential of especially well-educated women, because not to use the potential of well-educated women, it means also a lost investment. So yes, maybe it's good to speak more about the economic factors. This backwards or stagnating trend I find truly embarrassing and disappointing, as I said at the beginning. Now together we have a duty to step up the pace of change. That is why I stepped up our efforts to make the EU a better address for women, and we want to achieve it by several very concrete initiatives where we are very clearly result-oriented. In April, the Commission proposed the Work-Life Balance initiative to help both women and men to reconcile their professional and private lives. I dedicated also this year, 2017, as a year to combating violence against women. And we will not stop these efforts. We will continue campaigning and convincing people that to beat a woman is not a normal thing, because this is what part of our society still thinks. We allocated 10 million euro to support grassroots efforts to prevent violence and support its victims in the EU, and we also signed the Istanbul Convention on Preventing Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence. As you may know, soon on the 3rd of November, we will mark the EU Equal Pay Day. And this is the day when, symbolically, across the EU, women stop earning for the rest of the year in comparison to men. This is the value of the gender pay gap. 2 months a year of working for free. To speed up the progress in coming weeks, I will propose the action plan, which will consist of 8 key measures to tackle the pay gap from all angles. Comparing to a few generations back and comparing other parts of the world, it is fair to say that EU is indeed a good address for women, but we still have mountains to climb before we reach equality. Women are discriminated when it comes to their career path and access to jobs. Men are discriminated against their private lives and put under huge pressure to focus on their career and making money. Performing economies and gender equal societies go hand in hand. Closing gender pay gap is only possible if all of us join. This is why gender equality will be the theme of this year's Fundamental Rights Colloquium at the end of November. This event will gather an impressive number of activists, policymakers, academics and social partners, including businesses from around the world. And what I see very important on these colloquiums, this is the 3rd one we organize, that it is not the event where the convinced ones convince the convinced ones, because it is open, it is web streamed, and it has always very massive feedback from wide society. So I expect also this year colloquium to be such a big arena. Arena is something for fighting, no?
Platform.
I wanted to look like an educated woman. Agora, agora for the debate with outside world, not only with the people who belong to those convinced ones. So I'm looking forward to this colloquium, but now, first of all, I'm looking forward to the contributions of my colleagues sitting here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, dear Commissioner. And of course, you told, now I'm so happy to see that the Commissioner already knows all the figures, all the main findings, what we released today. And I'm very sure and convinced that you will use it really also in the debates and in the arguments. But maybe for you it might be interesting to know, let's say, what is the index, why it came up to light. And this is a unique product, as we say, because it was developed by a very young at that time institution. Jolanta, who is our senior researcher, can prove that. In 2013, we launched after 2.5 years of our existence. And that was the biggest challenge, because we needed to prepare something which is not for the whole world, which is only for the European Union, only for 28 member states, where you could compare, where you could look at how they're developing, where are the challenges. And that means that we developed something which can be for everyday use. If you want, you need some article, you just go look at the index. You go and look at our database, and you can see the differences. This is what we want. So what we discussed now, we presented new aspects. And as the Commissioner was saying, the domains and everything is there already described. I will not go into detail. But what we did now with the 3rd index, it's the most exciting from the aspect that it talks about human being, about a man, an old woman, a disabled man, a disabled woman, a man or a boy or a girl who are born with a migrant family, and then lone parents. So what we added into this index, we tried to show to the decision makers, but also for the people who believe that gender equality has been already achieved. You will meet many, not only older but also young, who say, "Oh, but there's nothing with gender equality. We are equal." But when you pick the figures and you see, as we were discussing, if I am a lone mother and my monthly income is 40% less than that of a lone father. So what does it say? Are we equal in the European Union? Can the laws really function? And we all know that the laws are equal for all the European Union member states. We have the directives, but then, as both Commissioner was saying, but also Minister, it's the implementation. Each member state chooses how they want to implement the directive, how they want to put, how much resources and budget is put on the, let's say, childcare or elderly care. Look at our index and you will see which countries really would need to reprioritize the budget. And of course, Sweden can tell how.
We still have to prioritize. Thank you. Thank you so much, Commissioner, and thank you, General Director, and thank you for being here. I think it is so important that we discuss this from a leadership perspective, because if there's anything that we've learned during the years when it comes to gender equality, is that leadership is very much needed. Because gender equality does not happen automatically. It is a myth that, that will solve itself with the next generation. It does not. It requires political will, it requires resources and political decisions. I think it is also very useful to have this index. We need facts. Real facts, not alternative facts, real facts, so that we can measure the reality and target interventions. So if we find gender injustice and inequality, then we have to target the budgets or the proposals that we make so we can close those gaps. Gender equality is a fundamental right, it's in the EU treaty, and we have, I think, the obligation on a member state level to fulfill these rights. It's also a smart economic thing to do, but I also think that any pressure from the Commission is very much needed, and I think that the index shows that. From the Swedish side, I am very proud to represent a feminist government who does put priority on these issues, and I think it shows. Some of the reforms that we have introduced were actually introduced in the 70s already, but really put up a model for this, and we have thus invested in that model. Some of them are individual taxation, not taxation on families, on individuals, regardless of gender and family situation. The same for social security systems, individually based, with incentives to take up paid work for both women and men. Abortion law, sexual and reproductive health and rights, extremely important if you want to take up paid work. Child and elderly care, accessible to everyone. And schemes like parental leave with incentives for both women and men to take up the leave. That is also important from a child perspective. All of that was introduced in the 70s, and I mentioned them because they are really crucial. And they are also reforms that any country could implement if they want to. I'm not saying that everybody should, but I'm saying that it is possible and everybody knows about those reforms. I think in the 90s we also put other groundbreaking reforms to the agenda about violence, most of all. Different legislation on that. And we have since invested, I would say, in these areas, and the latest example is the budget that we presented a few weeks ago. It's a gender. We use the tool of gender budgeting on a national level. The finance minister, she demands from us that we deliver proposals which are gender analyzed, and thus we have invested in sectors where we know that this will close gender gaps in all political areas, and that is how we work. So I think that also Sweden has a very high level of economic growth. We have the highest level in the EU when it comes to labour market participation. When it comes to women with a foreign background, this goes for both women and men, the highest ever measured in the EU, as far as I know. And when it comes to women with a foreign background working, or with a non-Swedish background working in Sweden, their levels of participation are as high as women in general in the Union. I think that this shows that it's about rights, but it's also very important for competitiveness, for a strong economy, and that really a welfare state, investments in social schemes, gender equality and economic growth, they really go together. So it's about political will, it's about changing power structures. We have to talk about that. It's about changing power structures. Men have more power than women. And I think also, I think it's important to talk about the fact that this is not news to anyone. We've been discussing this for ages. And I think that we do see in some countries, not political will, but political indifference, maybe even political arrogance. And I'm saying this because we know that it is possible to do things. Might not be the Swedish agenda, but we have, I think, as leaders, the responsibility to change this. So the good news is that it is possible to change, and we from the Swedish side will invite the upcoming rounds of presidencies to a conference on gender equality in Gothenburg in a few weeks, and I think that your index is great input to that. So I'm very proud and I'm very grateful that you did all this work. Thank you.
I am Vice President of the European Parliament, responsible for gender equality and diversity. I have to say that I totally agree with all the previous interventions. Fighting against gender inequalities is the same like fighting for an inclusive growth, and it's a part of a more general fight against the rising inequalities inside our European Union. When we speak about gender inequalities, we have existing, remaining inequalities, but we have also other kinds of inequalities which had strengthened the gap between the rich and the poor, between the North and the South. And if we want an inclusive European unification process, we have to fight for gender equality and to export the Swedish example all over Europe. I think that the index, which was already presented, is a very important tool because it shows with figures the work which has to be done in terms of practical results, covering the gaps. I plan to propose to the European Parliament to organize in the coming year, in 2018, a big hearing here in Brussels in the European Parliament with the help of EIGE, but not only to discuss between experts, but also to invite the national parliaments to share experiences and to put the positive experience vis-à-vis the negative experience. The only way to achieve goals and to increase the pressure to the governments to reprioritize their budgets is to compare results country by country. And I think that on that, Commission and the Parliament, with the help of experts like EIGE, and with the push of good examples like the Swedish government, we could do a lot of positive work in the coming weeks, months and years. And I wish that the next index, after 10 years, could present more positive results than the last one. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now I think we have space for your questions. Please.
Thank you. Roland Siegel of German Press Agency. I had a look into these tables which are presented in the report, and I saw that, for example, Germany fell back in the domain of knowledge concerning gender equality. From 2012, it was on place 16, and now 2015, just 3 years later, it's place 25. So I would like to have an explanation, some reasons why now the situation compared to other European countries, but also within Germany, deteriorated so much within this quite short period.
I think I will have to ask Jolanta, who is, she was presenting the index in detail, the knowledge.
That for Germany, the score dropped down because of the increasing gaps in participation lifelong learning. I spoke it a little bit earlier, that in general, the level of participation in lifelong learning is low in general, but the rates even dropped. And that is also associated with that more women are spending more time at work. Then they do caring work, and then we saw that gender gaps in caring work also increasing. It means that more women spend more time on caring, and it leaves less time for education, lifelong education. So engagement in informal learning, which would allow to gain, to improve a skills or to gain new skills to catch up with the new demands of the labor market. And this issue, as you see, it's very much interconnected: knowledge, time, and work. And we have 24 hours. So more work, it means less time for doing something else.
Maybe it's good to notice how we differentiate the jobs, because when we call it STEM, it's the field which covers science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And when we call it EHW, it's education, health, and welfare. And we see here in STEM that we have 66% of men, and in education we have very high
28% of men.
28% only, and the rest are women. And we can ask, and we must ask, why is it so? Whether these sectors are lower recognized, and that's why lower paid, because there are women, or vice versa, that the women go automatically to these to have these jobs because they simply studied the schools which lead to such jobs. This is a vicious circle, and we have to look into it. And wherever I go, I encourage the young women, go and study technical subjects. Do not focus only on these soft subjects or non-technical subjects, but it's not very fair to say it, because to work in health, education, and welfare, it's absolutely crucial for the society. So we have to recognize it more.
But maybe just a bit to add to what Jolanta was saying already, that when we looked at all those domains, as we call technically, so there is not a single one really where you can see extremely huge, jump leap forward. But the worst one is the domain of time, where we are talking about this unpaid. All the time, you spend on caring for elderly, for children, for disabled relatives, which is never valued. And also then that the part on this, that then you lose on your possibility for free time. This is the most gendered. It's extremely much in the hands of women, because the men usually don't choose it to do that. And this shows very much again that it goes back, which means that instead of now having more technologies, we maybe have more space for doing something else. Women still have to do even more. So that's also connected to the knowledge, what you mentioned.
Okay, next question, please, madam.
Hello. Marina Lalovic. I'm representing Italy, RAI, Radio Televisione Italiana. So I had a question related to Italy. Who seem to have obtained the biggest progress comparing to the other countries. So I wanted maybe to have some reasons regarding this kind of result, maybe because of the new implemented laws. So how come this kind of progress? And the other question is related to your publications. You were I didn't understand quite clearly whether you are going to present the next gender equality index. I read somewhere from 2019 you are going to present it on an annual basis, but you're constantly comparing these results 10 years after. So, and the first index was in 2013. So can you just clarify a bit how do you compare results, and when was the first index, and how you will implement your researches in the future? Thank you.
Okay, first of all, the idea, of course, with the index is that if you just have one-time score and you cannot compare in time, what is happening, so you cannot see really if the countries are doing better because the political, the leadership changes, the budget priorities change, and that's why you need to see really how the index is a bit of a lakmus paper to show that the measures are right. So when we developed it, because in 2005 we didn't exist, so when we developed and we launched it in 2013, so always what I have to remind to you that the data is always 2 years back, because we use only official, robust, reliable data, which means like now in 2013 we were using like two years old data. Now it is from 2015. So what we did, we went backward, because then we have to have always the availability of the data. Otherwise we cannot put it in the index. It has to be always regularly available, really very high quality. So which means then from now on we will not go backwards. Jolanta, no backwards from 2004 we are keeping.
Yeah, at the moment we have 4 points in time, and 2019 we'll have a 5th point in time. The fact that we are comparing today in the conference is a nice thing, that we can have can compare a trend during the decades. But we are doing comparisons between points of time as well. So if you see in the publications and the reports, you will see comparisons between 2005-2015, major focus of today's conference, but also 2005-2010, 10-12, 12-15. It's very important to keep comparing third edition with the previous one, because if you keep comparing 10 years all the time, you will not see if the changes that were implemented can actually give a result. So next index will be a 4th edition. It will be compared against 3rd edition. We will see what's happening in those 2 years period. But for the sake of analysis, we might look back as well to 2005 and to see if, for example, the change is linear, it's increasing, if there are fluctuations in change. So, but we will be adding point to time. We'll be developing time series, and we will be comparing all the time with the previous one, in order to see if change is happening. So in 2017, we will see what's happening starting from 2015.
And just to add about 19, yes, now we have proposed to the management board, we have the chair here of the management board, and to take a decision that from 2019, we will start doing annual index releases, but it's a very, very big piece of work. So of course we are very small as an agency, so what we will do, we will pick one domain, and then we will work with that domain in-depth analysis, and then only the scoring for the member states to see, because most probably by 1 year you won't see so big changes, let's say in, like you say, Italy, but then it will be one focus on one domain. And what we plan now, that will be also to support the Commissioner's initiative on the work-life balance, so then that in 19 will be focused on all the work-life, the most gendered aspects. As for Italy, we were discussing also internally as well. Of course, for Italy, this very, very huge jump, it's really a victory. And what we partly see also in Slovenia, it's also when they introduced the legal, when they introduced the quotas, the legislation, that also pushed it forward very much. In some countries they say you have debates. In Sweden you don't have legal, let's say legalized,
Quotas, no.
but still it depends how you pick. And our interpretation is that very big debates together with the quotas gave that jump forward.
Your question contained that important element, that how was it caused, or thanks to which measure Italy jumped up, and the same for Cyprus. And this is a very important thing for the Commission also, because we are going to analyze why there are those good progresses in some member states, and how was it caused, or what was the magic applied in the country. And very often we see that in the member states where they have the law, they already, I try to convince them, enable others to have it. And I speak now about Women on Boards directive, which has been blocked more than 1 year. We do not speak about it because we simply wait for one big country and two small ones to change the position. And that one big country is Germany. And I will try again now after the elections to open the dialogue with the new government and to ask whether this is the right time for the Germans to enable others to have it, because the law simply works. And so this is how the Commission wants to work with the index. We want to analyze the reasons for good progress, but also for the decreases. This is a fantastic analytical work, which also gives the Commission chance to come with the proper measures, because not all the measures must be and can be of legislative nature. But we have other possibilities. We have the funding, we have the training programs, we have campaigning, which is heavily needed here, because in this policy area we must change the mindset and break some of the traditions and stereotypes. You see such a long answer after such a short, concrete question. We will be better on it. Please, who else wants to ask? You are discouraged.
I have a question. I'm Carla Joosten from the weekly magazine Elsevier in the Netherlands. And I have a question for the Swedish minister. You had a big influx of migrants in your country. I guess you have a very good program to repair the gap, which is bigger in migrant groups. Or how do you solve this problem?
Thank you very much. I just wanted to start by reminding us that today is the International Day for Girls' Rights. And I think that what we're talking about is very important for girls now, but also for the next generation. And yes, we have received a lot of migrants. In the year of 2015, we received more than 160,000 people. The same year, we have a population of 10 million. That was most per capita that year. And we also had to change our legislation after that. But it wasn't the first year that we received migrants. In fact, migrants have really, we have benefited a lot from the contributions from people from all over the world seeking protection or coming to Sweden for other reasons. It is because they have contributed with work and knowledge and so on. And when it comes to labour market participation, obviously women with a migrant background have not as high labour market participation as Swedish-born women. And although it's on a general EU level for women, but we want to close that gap, because in our model of society, we expect from adults to take up paid work, and we demand from ourselves, from the state side, to provide possibilities to do so. So we have different schemes in adult education, as we were talking about earlier, in labor market policies which are targeted towards this group, also steering measures when it comes to social policy, policies for poverty reduction. For instance, that we never expect men to be head of household and only direct proposals of work towards him. We should only always see both women and men as head of households, also when they're two. So we ask the same from migrant women as of all other women, and it's our duty to see to it that tools are there to make this integration happen. We also have lots of schemes about gender equality for newcomers to Sweden. Different programs in Swedish education, very accessible on the internet, in youth service and so on, with information about rights and obligations when it comes to gender equality and sexual rights and health in Sweden. Thank you.
Okay, please.
Thank you very much. You say that the progress over the past decade has been going on at a snail's pace. If we fast forward 10 years, what do you see? What will be the progress in 10 years' time, and why? Thank you.
Of course, our vision is to have more women in decision-making positions, also in the positions which have an influence on the public opinion and on the society, because what we see in this gender index is that the women are not very much participated in the big positions in the sphere which we call social power. Sports, media, culture, this is also, it seems to be a domain of men. But we want to see more women in managerial positions, more women in politics and the public sphere, in decision-making positions. We desperately need to see much less, ideally zero violence, which is motivated by the gender difference. And we want to see zero pay gap, because I don't see any reason why women should be worse paid than men, and we want to see the employment of women above 75%, which is our long-term goal.
From my side, what I see, it is more that we have some extremely heavy, extremely grave gaps or differences, and where if you don't bridge them, you won't see very much of progress. And Commissioner mentioned also earlier the STEM, for example, the segregation. What do the girls study and what do the boys study? And then we know also, we did a study some time ago on the economic benefits of gender equality, where we analyzed, so let's say the difference. If the girls would study, now it's only very small percent, like you mentioned, 28% of boys that are just studying education. But then if you look at the girls, in some cases there's no girls at all in engineering or construction. We know that the future, 10 years forward, it is the digital society, it is, IT world, it is all the technologies. And we know at the same time, we don't want the girls to study that. We don't encourage, we don't invite, we don't coach them to study, which means then if we would be able to bridge the gap, so then this pay gap would also, when we did the calculations, this econometric, so the pay gap would close in the natural reasons with additional gender equality measures by 2050. If the girls would study STEM, then they would get better salaries, then they would have the possibility, then they would also, the pension gap would decrease, and we would have the full qualified labor force to contribute to the competitiveness, as the Minister was saying. But for all of that, we need gender equality measures. We need the work-life balance, we need the stereotype changing, we need its schools, we need all of that, which in a way, it doesn't cost much. It's more the commitment and then the decision to make it. So that would be my opinion.
So what was the most important measure? There's a number of measures.
what we see, especially from the last, that's it, the index is more like aggregation of different indicators. But what we did the last several studies, which we did for the presidencies, the occupational and educational segregation is extremely big cause of, let's say, how then the future, the life course of women and men goes different paths, and then how your dignified aging and life will be ensured. So this is very, very big thing really for to see, and it doesn't move at all. So it's really going backwards. So this is a very, very big thing. And violence, as you said, but violence is already another topic, and we are developing index domain on violence as well, which will be launching in November.
But when we look at the causality of the factors, you asked what is the most important. For me, it is the gender gap in employment. Because we see that from independence, economic independence of women, the way to being beaten to violence is very short. And so for me, absolutely important is to get rid of discrimination on the labor market. Yes, please, something more. Please look at the figures, make your own conclusions. There are very interesting reports on EU as such, and concrete states. And after you do this, please go and make a reality check. Because what we speak about here today is about real people, real stories, real women suffering of poverty, senior women who have 40% lower pensions than the men. And these very concrete things which we have measured are reflected in everyday life of people in Europe. Please do the reality check, because you as media will help very much to get the real human beings' faces as illustration of this big issue we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
They can help.
Thank you again. I have to run.
Yes,
I have another meeting.
Yes, so then I contact you. Oh, look, Regner is giving this you have to wear. No, it's about index, you have to come out there.
Monica is my
I will share the next plenary with her.
Okay.